Winnie Madikizela-Mandela's new book has hit the shelves. Here to tell us more about it are her co-editors, her granddaughters, Swati, Dlamini and Sahm Venter from the Nelson Mandela Center of Memory, who is also, in fact, an editor of the book. Ladies, thanks very much for coming in. Great to have you with us this morning. Now, we know the story of Winnie Madikizela-Mandela spans so many decades, but this diary, of course, takes one slice out of that roughly year and a half of her 491 days of detention. What made her start keeping a journal, Sam?
Well, she tells us that one of her advocates at the time, David Soggett, made the suggestion. And in fact, she did it only when she became an awaiting trial prisoner in 1970, after a long period without being able to see her lawyers. And she dubbed it the saga. So when we got the journal, it says, the saga. So it was his suggestion.
I mean, you speak about it in very light-hearted terms now, but it really is quite a harrowing account, isn't it, Swati, of what happened to her while she was in detention at that time?
Yes, I mean, 16 months of being in detention, and most of it in solitary confinement, is very harrowing. And just the circumstances under which she was there, and, you know, being ripped away from her children, being apart from her husband. But at the same time, this is a time in which she felt the closest to him, to my grandfather, because they're both going through the same thing at the exact same time. So, you know, I think the book is very insightful in terms of what her daily account was like for her in prison, but also in terms of what my grandfather's going through at the same time, you know, whilst he's in prison, not knowing that, you know, she's also going through the same thing that he is.
Let's ask you this. I mean, she had thought for a long time that this diary of hers had been lost. Just describe to us that moment when it comes back into her possession after all these years.
Well, I mean, we weren't actually privy to that, you know, encounter when Greta Soggett actually returned the journal to her. But, you know, she came to me and she said, you know, I've got this journal that's been returned to me. And she said, I haven't even looked at it. I immediately handed it over to the Center of Memory for them to keep for me. And she said, you know, I want you to take it and I want you to do what you think is best. I'd like for it to become a book. But if you think, you know, that's fitting, then, you know, I'd like you to maybe just see it through. So, you know, she hadn't even looked at it, she hadn't even touched it, she hadn't even opened it. So I can only imagine what it was like for her to actually even start reading some of the journals as and when we sort of presented it to her over the 2 years that we worked on the book.
Sam, when this document came into your possession, what was it like? What were your first thoughts around it?
Well, as Swati said, her grandmother approached us 2 years ago, and me it was at the memorial service for Dlamini, who was killed in a car accident. And when I started transcribing it, you know, it's in somebody else's handwriting, so that immediately is a kind of an obstacle. But I was just completely blown away. I mean, I still get shivers thinking about it, that here is a person writing at that time about what is going on, and they're in solitary confinement, and they are tortured, and they cannot get out. And the fact that it emerged when it did was just so incredible and so special. You know, and to see her such a strong woman today, having gone through all that, I just find it unbelievable that she managed to get through with that strength.
I think what you were alluding to there at the beginning of what you were talking about now was the kind of rawness of it. We always know putting a story together years after you've experienced it is often tainted by time and all sorts of other things that have elapsed between that event and the time in which it's recorded. What does the rawness of this book offer the reader?
I think it in a way offers them a kind of fly on the wall position, as if they're in that cell, that they're going through that same experience with her. And I think it's even stronger because they'll be reading it in the comfort of their own home and going, my goodness, I have this, I'm feeling so emotional about her experience, but I'm okay, which makes it even more dramatic, I think.
Swati, let's bring you back in here. I mean, you're reading all this stuff, you're having to transcribe it, but you can't really be dispassionate about it, can you? Because you're reading about the torture, the cruelty against your own grandmother. What was that like?
It was very hard for me. I mean, there were many times when I would sob just reading the book and just going through some of the material. And I think it brought me closer to her, and it really kind of gave me such a deeper insight into who she really is and what she's really had to endure and what she's been through. You know, of course I know her story, I know her life and all that kind of stuff, and obviously a personal account from her as to what she's been through, but this is an intimate detail of the details of what she was actually put through. So, you know, it was very hard for me, and I think Sam and I were actually just remarking the other day that I'd have to read it for the third, fourth time again, sort of more, you know, in depth and stuff, because, you know, initially we were kind of just reading it just to, you know, get an idea of what was in there, what's the actual material. And then the second time I read it, I literally sat for 2 days just sobbing. So,
you know, she's kind of a private person in some ways. She has a very public political life, but in other ways she is quite a private person, or she comes across that way. How easy was it for her to hand over these intimate details of her humiliation, really?
I don't think it was an easy decision for her to make, but I think because this is such a historical part of our history, and for her, I think for people to know this and to know where we come from and what many people in this country have been through, not just her. This is just her story that is documented, but there are many other people who haven't even lived to tell their story, their survival stories, and I think it's a story of survival, and I think she wants people to know that, and also just in terms of like just the history of our country, that it's so rich, and just that people were tortured, people went through really difficult times, and it's just, I think, important for us to remember that and to know, especially from a woman's perspective, being Women's Month, you know, and just to know what some of the women went through in our country.
I've got literally less than a minute left with you, but I want to pick up on that point about women. I mean, we know that lots of the stories, the struggle stories of men have been well documented. Absolutely. What does this mean for us, for the body of knowledge involving women's struggle history?
It's very important because women are now being foregrounded as people who were victims in the same way that men were, and black women as well. There's very little known about what happened to women in detention. So this book is going to form an important part of our history. And it's essential that people see just what they had to go through to achieve our democracy.
Swati, would you like to add something to that about the struggle?
I think it was pivotal for us to launch it in Women's Month, just to celebrate and just honor the women who really have contributed, and my grandmother being such an integral part of our history. And you know, it's just an honor and a privilege for Sam and I to have done this for her. And I think all women will be able to, you know, take something away from this and just know that, like, you know, we're also just like, you know, very much a part of our rich history.
And it's been a great delight to have both of you with us. Thank you very much. And please take our good wishes back to your grandfather. We are really wishing all the best for his healing at this time. Thanks, ladies.
Thank you.
Right, those were the co-editors of Winnie Madikizela-Mandela's book, 149 Days, Sahm Venter and Swati Dlamini.
News that moves. enca.com.